Professor Arno de Meer, President of Singapore Management University, faculty members, students of SMU, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to be here to give the SMU Presidential Distinguished Lecturer Series. And it is always a pleasure to be back in Singapore, my second home, as I spent a few years of my secondary school here. So you may detect slight traces of Singlish in my delivery. And it will also be mixed with Australian and American accent, obviously. I would like to first of all congratulate SMU, one of the newer educational institutions in Singapore, which, although you are only 15 years old, has become a center of excellence for research and teaching. You know, if you were on an adult life cycle, you are still an adolescent, right? But you have actually matured very fast. I would like to congratulate you. I know that there's now 6 schools and there's a lot of interactive collaboration and a project-based approach to teaching. This is what I got from your website, so I have to believe it's right. And this makes SMU graduates, I think, ready to face the changing world that we face. This is part of the story that I'm going to tell today about the changing world that we face, because it is a world which is more interdependent, connected, creativity and knowledge-based. As the Minister of Tourism and Creative Economy, which was my last portfolio, I really learned a lot about how to develop creativity and innovation. And I learned that it was not enough just to be smart, creative, or innovative, but that collaboration and being connected to networks was really key. And you know, with technology, network doesn't just mean the people around you. It's like the whole world. So that 2 + 2 does not equal 4. It can equal 4, it can equal 10, and it can equal 1 million, depending on how the collaboration comes about. I'm daunted as the list of previous speakers that have addressed this series, and I hope that I can do justice to this forum today. The topic that I have chosen is one that's very dear to my heart, whether as an economist or as someone who has been with the government for the last 10 years and as an Indonesian, which is the topic is basically, you know, the world has gone through this turbulence since the global economic crisis. And then it's now coming back to normal as like pre-crisis normal. But there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of uncertainties and a lot of transformations going beyond this so-called new normal. And this is really what I want to share with you today from the perspective of a country like Indonesia. And the big question for not just for Indonesia, but I think for a lot of countries, as we kind of adjust back post-global crisis, when we talk about going beyond the new normal, there's a lot of questions and a lot of issues that we are facing. And the issues are similar. The external issues are quite similar, but how we as a country need to address it can be different depending, obviously, on where you are now. So let me first of all begin with the new normal. How did Indonesia fare, or what does the new normal actually mean? And how resilient was a country like Indonesia in navigating to the new normal? I think, first of all, new normal is kind of maybe a terminology that came about post-2009 global crisis. So if you recall, we had a global crisis in 2009. The epicentrum of that global crisis was in the developed countries. It was in the US, it was in Europe. And we took business unusual kind of policies in addressing the crisis in 2009. It was in total contrast to the 97-98 East Asian financial crisis, which occurred in our part of the world. To prevent the world from going into a Great Depression like it happened in the 1930s, the decision was made under the G20 umbrella that we would do concerted fiscal stimulus. So it's actually what happened was you swung back from kind of letting markets be the source of growth to really state-led growth. The governments came in with fiscal stimulus. loose monetary policy, lowered interest rates, provided a lot of liquidity into the economy, and bailed out banks and companies. Mind you, this is the same people who actually gave us advice during the East Asian financial crisis, who told us fiscal austerity, monetary austerity, no bailouts, close down the banks, okay? Which we did. We went through this, and it was very painful. We came out of it, but it was very painful and very long drawn. But anyway, it was business unusual. So that was not normal, if you like. And of course, the world didn't go into a Great Depression. We managed to grow back, and there was a rebound, quite a strong rebound in 2010 to 2012. And a lot of that was driven by countries, by so-called emerging economies, including China, including Indonesia, which continued to grow positively in 2009, despite other countries going into a recession. So international coordination did work. Or the other part of the solution that came about, this is kind of a trade issue, was that countries reacted. There was a kind of a fear, the 1930s Great Depression fear and the 1930s tariff war fear, that countries, because they're in a huge recession, they would just close their borders and let domestic companies sell domestically, so that you are preventing the recession from getting worse, which we know is actually is going to make it more, actually worsen the situation. So despite all kinds of ways to prevent that to happen, you still had countries like the ones who always tell us open markets, free trade, and so on, including countries like the US, who had this Buy America campaign. Europe also had a Buy Europe campaign. So I'm just saying the world actually turned upside down at the time, into a rather abnormal situation. So now we are going back to normal. Oh, one more thing about the recovery. The recovery that took place 2010 to about 2012, 2013, as I said, was driven by emerging economies. And China played a great role in that. If you looked at the numbers, I think 40 or 50% of the recovery that happened post-crisis was actually coming from emerging economies, especially in Asia. So what's the new normal? The new normal is going away from this abnormal situation where you don't have fiscal stimulus anymore. You don't have easy money. Easy money was a boon to us because we are getting low-cost financing from abroad at low interest rates. It helped to stimulate our economies too. And it is also a situation of the new normal for China. The new normal for China is a slowdown in the growth of China, which is going to be around 7 to 7.4% compared to 8 to 10% previously. And the whole restructuring that China is undergoing. And if you look at the numbers, especially for a country like Indonesia, a lot of our exports are going to China. So we are rather impacted by, and more impacted by the slowdown in China than by any other aspect of the global economy. The final thing I would say about this new normal, it's not kind of an economic issue, it's more philosophical, or I'm not sure you could call it philosophical, but perhaps a new way or a different way that we are questioning ourselves regarding the role of the state and markets. This is kind of, it swings back and forth, the way countries or the world view the role of the state versus the market when we are talking about economic growth. And after the crisis, when, if you recall, to summarize the word, it was, irrational exuberance. That's the word used, that there was all this bubbles that happened, and that was kind of the part of the crisis. And now there's kind of a questioning about the role of markets, but we also don't believe in the role of the state. So finding that balance is one issue that's still affecting the way we do our policies, the way we interact with each other. I think the other thing that happened was the questioning of the ability of multilateral institutions to cope with the changing global global risks and vulnerabilities that arose from the financial crisis, from the recent Ebola crisis, and the recognition that of the inability of states to deal with negative or positive forces of globalization. Now, I think this is a big question out there. And post-crisis, because of the increased role of emerging economies in the world, we call it the multipolar world now. It's not just US, Europe, or Japan anymore. It's really multipolar because emerging economies have economic power, contributed to growth, and want to play a greater role and have a greater say, whether it's in the multilateral institutions or whether it's strengthening the regional institutions and cooperation to complement what's happening in the world. Why is that important? It's important because it's the way the rules of the game, whether it's about the role of the state and market, whether it's about the role of multilateral institutions or global rules of the game, we want to have a greater say. Emerging economies want to have a greater say. So that's kind of the new normal. Now, just very briefly, because I think we are more interested in talking about beyond the new normal. I think what is the new normal and how countries have adjusted to it is kind of well documented, and people talk a lot about it. Now, Indonesia, just very briefly, how did Indonesia fare in dealing with this process of going back to the new normal, which is a world without the fiscal stimulus or the monetary stimulus? What happened was, especially in 2013, when the US economy began to be showing signs of recovery, there were indications that easy money is about to be over. Interest rates are about to go up. And what happened for a lot of countries like Indonesia, there was a capital outflow. The easy money that had come in seeking higher interest in emerging economies now went out. And that led to, of course, affecting our exchange rate. And because of the global slowdown, especially with China since 2011, 2012, commodity prices also fell. And Indonesia, because 65% of our exports are commodity-based, we really also, besides having to deal with easy money being over, fiscal stimulus being withdrawn, we also had to face low commodity prices, which affected our exports. So current account deficit and weakening of rupiah. So much so that there was this term that came about, Fragile Five. These were countries that had high current account deficits or high fiscal deficits. So what Indonesia did was conventional economic policy. Now, if students out there, this is a test for you after the lecture. Your lecturer is going to take note of this, and they're going to ask you what is conventional economic policy in dealing with such macro situation. Choosing stabilization over growth. So to prevent capital outflow, we increased the interest rate. We allowed the rupiah to move in line with fundamentals. Rupiah depreciated 17% in 2013, and in 2014, around 2 to 4%. Fiscal consolidation, we raised the fuel price, switched expenditure to infrastructure and social welfare, and we did some structural reforms. So this is Reform 101. In bad times leads to good policies. Crisis leads to good policies. So some structural reforms were undertaken, including streamlining permits and removing some import restrictions. So the result was we grew at 5.8% and things stabilized. Now we managed to grow at 4.9% in 2009 during the crisis. We managed to take advantage of the rebound. We grew at 6% on average till 2013. Now, where are we? We are in steady state in the new normal. But in 2014, we are facing a situation of slowing down of growth, where Indonesia's growth in 2014 was 5.1% compared to an average of 6% in the previous few years. And it's actually very simple. Again, this is for you students taking economics. You will get a question on this also. You know, we had fiscal stimulus, we had easy money that was driving growth. There was also investment flowing in. Exports was not doing very well. Consumption, some growth. So you got, with new normal, no more fiscal stimulus, no more monetary stimulus. You can't really grow unless you have increased investments and increased productive capacity. And this is why Indonesia is not growing as high as it should be, because we are facing supply side constraints. So what we talked about earlier, fiscal stimulus, monetary stimulus, external demand from exports, and in this case, because the global economy is still not doing well, we are not getting any external demand either, so it can only come from domestic demand. And what you are facing is the supply side now. No more demand side for growth. It has to come now from the supply side. And this is really where the big issue is for Indonesia. To go beyond new normal, we have to address the supply constraints, supply side constraints, to be able to increase our growth and our production. Let me see, how do I use this? Just press this. This one? I don't have very many slides, but okay. This is really the crux of Indonesia's supply side constraint. Indonesia's infrastructure is in critical situation, especially to support the high growth plan if you want to go beyond new normal. Total infrastructure spending is only less than 4.5% of GDP compared to China, which is at 7 and 10%. And you can see that logistics cost is very high in Indonesia compared to our competitors like China and Korea at much less than 20%, with us at 26%, and developed countries, which you would think is the efficient best practices, at around 10 to 11%. So we are like 3 times more than the most efficient logistics supplier, like in developed countries. So this is really the challenge for Indonesia. I just got something in my email today. It said Jakarta is now the worst traffic congested city in the world. So that's not good news, but it is, you know, you can see travel time 100 kilometers in Indonesia is 2.6 hours compared to 1 hour in Malaysia and China. And so we know this is really very much our problem now. This is I just wanted to show this. I didn't want to inundate you with slides about Indonesia, but I wanted to show this because Indonesia's infrastructure and logistics challenge is because we are an archipelago with 17,000 islands stretching across 3,000 kilometers. It takes you from Sabang to Merauke, I think maybe 7 hours or 8 hours to fly. That's longer than from Washington to Brussels. Yeah? So we are a very big country. A lot of times people forget Indonesia is a very big country and a very challenging country because of the inter-island. You have to actually mix inter-island transportation, small and big ports with roads, railway, and so on. So it is challenging. The new government has tried to roll out this sea toll development, marine connectivity integrated with land connectivity. Believe me, it's a big challenge. And total cost, estimated cost of infrastructure for the next 5 years is 480 billion, out of which 25% will be coming from the government. The rest will have to come from private sector and state-owned enterprises, and private sector mean also public-private partnership. Okay, now I want to talk about going beyond the new normal, which is obviously the more interesting question. So while we have successfully navigated this process of going back to the new normal, we are now facing a lot of challenges, risks, opportunities, and transformations. What are they? The main risks and opportunities externally on the positive side is lower oil prices. Lower oil prices because we used to be a member of OPEC, but now we are net oil importer. So it benefits us because it will reduce our import cost. On the positive side externally, I would say the restructuring of what's happening in China, the restructuring that's happening in China is actually also an opportunity for us. As the labor costs in China goes up, as China moves away from labor-intensive exports, it's still an opportunity for countries like Indonesia to enter the space that China has left. On the domestic side, the main opportunities are with the new government and its reform agenda, including addressing the infrastructure policies and how to roll out the projects faster, and all the improving of investment climate, bureaucratic reform that is on the agenda that promises also to be hopefully providing growth opportunities and so on. On the negative side, you know this well, slower world recovery. I think the only good news at the moment is the US. Eurozone, still big question marks out there, especially with what's happening in Greece as well. Japan is in recession. We don't quite know when it's going to get out of recession. China, as it moves to the new normal of 7 to 7.5 growth, and it seems all the analysis on China is saying that they are going to do this because it is important for them to do this. In other words, it's a different growth path for China. As they restructure, they are going to have to grow at a lower growth trajectory. They're not going to focus on increasing investment, increasing growth, build infrastructure, increase growth. They have to restructure their banks. They have to deal with the overcapacity in the various sectors. And of course, there's a lot of governance and administrative reforms, anti-corruption move that's happening in China, which in the short run will lead to lower growth. But if they get it all right, then it promises more sustainable future growth. The other thing that, two other negative downside risks that we must face, and this is what I'm saying is not just being faced by Indonesia, obviously, but by many countries in the world. But specifically for Indonesia, weaker commodity prices is going to still be with us. And that will affect Indonesia because our exports, 65% of our exports are commodity-based. So beyond new normal for Indonesia means we have to diversify our export structure. Yeah, otherwise we will have not the new sources of growth. Rubber prices are down 70% from the peak, coal 53%, CPO 44%, copper 33%, and it looks like it's going to stay that way. These are the major exports for Indonesia. And finally, the feared tapering off of quantitative easing, US interest rates will go up sometime this year, they say. So financial condition is going to be tightening up. So this is on the negative side. On the externally, on the domestic side, it's really, can we address the supply constraints? Can we undertake the reforms? Can we implement the reforms that we set out to do, that the new government set out to do? On top of that, there are a number of megatrends in the medium term that will define what is going to be facing us beyond new normal. One is that you can see all over the world, not just in developing countries now, but developed countries everywhere, including the US, heightened concern with inequality and unemployment and underemployment. And this leads to tensions, and it affects policies and the way countries want to open up or engage with each other. In the case of Indonesia, we succeeded in reducing poverty from 16% to 10.96%. But inequality went up tremendously during the last 10 years. I mean, those of you who know what a Gini coefficient is, it basically measures the inequality from the income sense. It went from 33 to 41, which is quite a big jump. Open unemployment is down from 7 to about almost slightly below 6%. But underemployment, that means people working less than 35 hours, is about 40%. So it's still a big challenge. Second megatrend, demographics. Asia, we have two poles in Asia, if you talk about East Asia. You've got aging population in Japan and China. China's demographic dividend has already switched. To some extent, Korea. And in Southeast Asia and India, you've got the opposite. You've got demographic bonus. 50% of Indonesia's 250 million people are less than 29 years old. Yeah. Is that a demographic dividend, or is it a time bomb? It's a time bomb if you can't employ them, right? So that's why Indonesia has to grow at the minimum of 6%. Otherwise, we cannot absorb all these people productively. Besides that, I wanted to mention this because I always mention this when I talk about Indonesia. Indonesia, because of its size and what's happening in Indonesia, we are probably the most mobile connected country in the world. Social media is very alive in Indonesia. We have, I think, 250 million mobile phone users, so 100% penetration rate. On the internet side and fixed line, it's much lower, just because the broadband is not quite there yet. Fourth biggest, largest Facebook user in the world. It's at 45 million. We used to be number 2, and then Brazil and India took over. But 45 million Indonesians use Facebook. We are, I think, number 4 also for Twitter. But in terms of frequency of use and trending topics, Jakarta is number 1 Twitter capital. Even though we are the most macet, the most traffic jam, but we are also, that's probably why, they're tweeting from the car. But, Twitter, we are the Twitter capital of the world, and that's an opportunity. It's been part of democracy. It's been part of the way you do social marketing, political marketing, and it is an economic opportunity also. We talked already about low oil prices and low commodity prices. The fourth mega trend is urbanization and smart livable cities, changes in health and lifestyles. And this is opportunity for construction, infrastructure, but also a challenge for sewage, for water, and so on. So these are all mega trends. The fifth mega trend is what they call destructive technologies. It's the Internet of Internet, it's automation and robotics, it's mobile connectivity, of which Indonesia is very much a part of. One of the issues, for instance, when we had issues with the labor, or if you are running short of labor in other countries, you will go towards automation or robotics. Yeah, so this is the way, the smart way of the world coming up. And finally, of course, what is the locomotive of growth? If you don't have this easy money, easy fiscal policy anymore, you go back to the way of the world. This is conventional wisdom. The locomotive of growth will continue to be trade and investment flows. After all, trade is a costless stimulus. The government doesn't have to put out any budget. But there will be a lot of opportunities in trade and investment for countries like Indonesia and for countries in this part of the world. Basically, I said earlier that the recovery from the global crisis was driven by emerging economies, and a lot of them were in Asia. And what happened, I think, in the last 5 to 10 years is that we've always had this economic integration or like regional production base that evolved in Asia, starting with Japanese investing in Taiwan, and then Taiwan moved, the cost got higher in Taiwan, they moved to Hong Kong, and then they moved to Southeast Asia. That was kind of the traditional pattern. And then China, of course, entered into the picture, and China became a large part of this production network. So we were producing efficiently, competitively, to sell to outside our region, to the US, to Europe, and so on. But that has changed in the last 10 years. Increasingly, it's not just about intra-East Asia or intra-ASEAN trade, which is in components and parts, but it is also in the final goods and in selling to East Asia as a final destination market. Because of the increased purchasing power, the increased size of the middle class, I think the numbers for ASEAN is going to go from 80 million middle class now to 160 million by 2030. The number for Indonesia is like 60 million to 120 million. So this growth in middle class and consumption is, actually I forgot to mention that, that's another transformative trend that will be important for our part of the region in going beyond the new normal. And increased economic integration, 25% of our ASEAN trade is with each other, intra-ASEAN. If you take East Asia, which East Asia is including ASEAN, the 10 countries of ASEAN, includes Japan, China, Korea, India, Australia, and New Zealand. It's about 2/3 intra-East Asia trade. For tourism, 46% of ASEAN tourism is intra-ASEAN. Yeah. And we have free visa for ASEAN. If you're an ASEAN national, you can go and visit any other ASEAN country without a visa. And ASEAN is 8.9% of the world population, 5% of the world output, and 6.5% of world trade. Yeah. So we are not insignificant. And did you know that the size of US and European investments to ASEAN, in some cases slightly larger or at least almost the same as China? Yeah? So we are like the third growth pole, if you like. And if you take East Asia, RCEP is 47.2% of the world population, because you've got India and China in there, 28.8% of world output, and 27.9% of world trade. Let's compare it to TPP 12. TPP is the US kind of led regional agreement that's trying to happen. Population is 800 million, or 11%, GDP 37.6%, and trade 26%. So in terms of trade, it's lower than RCEP. Yeah? So what I'm saying is that Indonesia and all of you who are coming from this region, we are in a good neighborhood. And it's a growing neighborhood. And this is why going beyond new normal is going to be important for us. Okay, going beyond the new normal, what does this mean, and what needs to be done? I'm conscious of the time, so I'll try to be brief. We just talked about growth and trade and so on. I just wanted to highlight the issue of social issues that Indonesia and probably countries like China and India have similar issues with. So in the next 5 years, going beyond new normal for a country like Indonesia, as I said, what's in a number? Now, I know all of you are not economists, but the easiest way to think about why we need to grow, what is 5% better than 6% for a country like Indonesia? Yes, because of the employment creation that we must have. We have to grow at a minimum of 6% to be able to create employment and therefore reduce poverty and so on. The target is average 7% in the next 5 years. And we want to create employment. We want to reduce poverty from 11% to 7 to 8%. And here's the challenge. The number of near poor, that means just above the poverty line, is still 40%. So that's another reason why you have to grow. The moment you have a contraction in growth, the number of people poor are going to increase. And then you have the inequality. And in Indonesia, the inequality is across regions, and rural and urban. Poor access of health, education, and transportation is very acute in the rural area. For instance, those saying they have poor access of health was 40% in rural areas compared to 8% in urban areas. For health, it's 41% compared to 7%. For education, and for transport, it's 50%. So getting your infrastructure right, getting connectivity is not just about efficiency and competitiveness. It's about reducing the inequity that is happening in Indonesia. Electrification is even worse. I think that's my next. Oh, I couldn't have that slide. Oh, maybe yes. Electrification rate is still low. So the green ones are greater than 70%. The yellow is 50 to 70% electrification. And you can see Papua, most of Papua is still at less than 50%. So this is a big challenge. And I'm a great believer that electricity is kind of what opens up everything else in terms of education, in terms of health. You can do, with technology, you can do diagnostics using, as long as you have electricity, through the internet, through using technology. And it opens up, the moment you have electricity, you can have a phone, you can have a computer. And that opens up the whole world for you in terms of information, in terms of being able to sell your services, know about what you can do with the world. And your market is not just Indonesia, it's the world. Yeah? And I think this is really a big challenge for Indonesia. Okay, so let me just now close with what should Indonesia do in going beyond the new normal? I can say a lot of things. I'm just going to pick on a few topics. One relates to, yes, trade is the stimulus that you need, trade and investment. And the whole transformation of what's happening in the way the way countries trade, and the fact that Indonesia has to diversify away from commodity-based exports. At the moment, we only have a limited number of manufactured exports and services exports. It's automotive, textiles, garments, some electronics, and footwear, and tourism services. And this is what we need to expand. And the other thing that happened after the crisis, because of all the vulnerabilities and the shocks that you experience externally, a lot of countries said, oh, we don't want to go export-oriented strategy anymore. We want to just focus on our market, produce everything here, sell everything here. Obviously, that's a false argument, because what you need to do is you need to be competitive, period, whether you're selling domestically or whether you're selling globally. And the whole world has changed. It's no longer this production network, it's what they call the global value chain, which I'm sure you are being taught in your classes. So it's value creation at each part of the production process. And it's very fragmented with technology, whether it's IT technology, whether it's transportation technology or inventory management. Things have become much, much more fragmented, and they don't even talk about trade in products anymore. They talk about it as trade in tasks. Yeah? Where's the design task being done? Where is the R&D task being designed? So it's the tasks that you are trading. And that makes for a more complicated world where you've got goods, components, parts, services, people moving. And for that to be, if you want to be part of that, you have to facilitate the movement of goods, people, and have efficient services to support what you are doing. So this is really the direction that you must take. Otherwise, you're not going to be part of the value chain. So in the case of Indonesia, we are just slightly better than Vietnam in terms of being part of this is just looking at the goods. You are not even talking about the services part of it. And this is because Indonesia hasn't been part of the manufactured global value chain. This is the whole economics profession, trade profession has, since 2009, I guess, 2008, really realized the importance of measuring value, global value chains. This is an example of a study on the cost of iPod and iPad. And this is, I think, this is for iPod. I think this is for iPhone, sorry. They measured the cost of producing 10 iPhones in China. So if you look at exports of China to the US, you will see a final good 10 iPhones being exported to US at $1,875 or $187 per iPhone. And you are using value of US components of 229. So it looks like China has a huge trade surplus with the US. And obviously this is one of the sensitive issues that we know is always affecting US-China relations. But guess what? If you look at all the components that China imports to make that iPhone, it's coming from Taiwan, Germany, Korea, and the rest of the world. The value added in China is the assembly, which is $65. So if you take $65 to 1,875, it's only 6%. So the value added in China is only 6%, okay? And this is really the global value chain. We haven't even put in design, services, testing, and all that. How much does an iPhone cost? This is the cost of the iPhone, $187. I don't know how much was an iPhone in 2009, but my guess maybe $300, $400. Is it? What? So, you know, Apple's making $200 per iPhone. Do they deserve it? Well, they're the ones who designed it. The creativity and the IP, the intellectual property rights, the value of that is still in the US, okay? So this is just to illustrate to you with an example, what is the importance of global value chain. I'll give you two more examples which are not common. One is that we are doing a lot of studies on global value chain at the firm level, and this would be a good project for SMU. I think you may be already doing it. I got an example from Hong Kong. They looked at the value chain of bread, making bread. Guess what is the services component in making bread? What was in the value chain of making bread? What was the percentage of services in making bread? I should say, it's looking at from making the bread all the way to the time when it's delivered to the consumer. Not bad. It's 70%. Yeah? That underlines for you the importance of having efficient services, because it's the delivery, it's the distribution, it's the warehouse and the inventory and so on. I'll give you another example. Do you know what is this fancy Irish ceramics? Dalton, Royal Dalton. Okay, Royal Dalton. The only factory that Royal Dalton has outside of Ireland is 2 hours from Jakarta in West Java. They did research. They went to India, they went to China, they went everywhere, and they chose Indonesia. Because in Indonesia, they found it was the highest value and lowest cost for hand painting the ceramics. They said that they could train an Indonesian worker in 6 months compared to 3 years in Ireland. And they found that they couldn't train the same workers in India or in China. So we are doing it's high value added. It's the painting, it's the hand painting. So to be part of the global value chain, you've got to have efficient logistics, you've got to have your ICT, you've got to have domestic industry linkages and clusters and hubs, you've got to have a conducive business climate, you've got to have an open import regime, trade and investment regime, you've got to have efficient services and inputs at international prices, and quality is very important. And this is part of the challenge for Indonesia. So increasing value added, taking advantage of ASEAN and the global production chain. Okay, I know I'm running out of time. I just give you a list of what reforms Indonesia needs to do. I'll just focus on there's fiscal, there's labor, there's infrastructure, which we already mentioned, but infrastructure is a big challenge. And the big challenge here is land access and making sure there's economic pricing in the public-private partnership. Logistics, human capital, which means allocation of budget for education and health, and ensuring an open trade and investment regime. And one-stop investment service, investment climate, and so on, which is all in the works. I would just mention that the challenge for Indonesia, and I would say this kind of questioning is being replayed all over the world. You have this dilemma or maybe inconsistency. I just tried to describe to you the world of trade and trade in tasks and how you have to be part of the global value chain. But domestically, post-global crisis, there is an anti-trade view and an anti-opening up view, politically, rhetorically, or whatever. Whereas in fact, this is inconsistent with how you should be seeing the world. So it's not just Indonesia, it's happening elsewhere. This kind of tension is going to can affect the policies. So we just have to keep that in mind. The final thing, I just wanted to share, there's this long list of reforms, including bureaucratic reforms, that is being outlined by the new government. Implementing reforms and governance, we know what to do, but doing it is another thing. It's not easy. There's no magic bullet. You need political will and commitment on a sustained basis. You need champions. You need ownership within the relevant government bodies, in the kind of wider political world, and probably obviously by the business sector. Time and timing is very important when you do reforms. You can't, choosing when you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, and packaging it in the right way. And you can't do it all at once. So you've got to pick the quick wins to get buy-in. You can't reform the whole ministry, you can't reform the whole country. So you pick islands of best practices within your ministry, or you do a pilot project in one of the ports or one of the airports before you roll out the whole thing. And I can give you many examples of how we try to do that. And bureaucratic reforms, that's going to be ongoing process. And maybe this is something you also teach and try to deal with here. Inertia and resistance is really what we face. How do you do that in a bureaucracy compared to a company? It's quite different because unless you can fire them, and it's not easy to fire them. It's not easy to fire them. So the whole issue is a different management problem. Okay, I went longer than I planned, and I didn't get to finish all that I wanted to share about what needs to be done beyond the new normal, but basically it is about the right policies, the right institutions, and even if you can't do it all, you got to pick quick wins, and the most important thing is to show the direction that you're going, because that's what, the signaling that investors and business people and probably civil society are looking for. So it's you should not judge governments or countries by, they've got to do everything. They've got to do this long wish list, and they've got to do it now, because they can't. The most important thing is the framework and the direction. Thank you very much.